Film opens in Paris, where a tense-faced man has been staying in an empty building for 2 days. He keeps staring at the building across from him. That man turns out to be a professional assassin, known simply as the Killer, who is waiting for his target to show up. However, he still doesn't know the exact day or hour when the target will appear. While waiting, the Killer occasionally does yoga stretches and steps out of the building to look for breakfast.
Alongside the other 46 million they serve each week.
Then he receives a call from his handler, Hodges, who gives him a small but important piece of information. The target might come in 2 days. After getting his breakfast, the Killer returns to the empty building and continues his routine, all the while reminding himself that if he wants his plan to succeed, he must never allow any empathy. Moreover, the Killer holds a covert record in his line of work. Of the thousands of individuals he has ended, not one case has ever been exposed. That afternoon, while the Killer is honing his aim, a man suddenly tries to enter the room. Instantly, the Killer feels a burst of anxious excitement and prepares to use his firearm on that man. But who would have guessed? The man ends up not coming in. As dusk falls, the Killer lying down for a brief rest. However, as a diligent assassin, the Killer cannot simply doze off like most people, so he forces himself to wake every 5 minutes so he won't miss the moment his target steps outside. When he finally deems he's rested enough, the Killer sees the first signs of the target's arrival. Staff at the building across the way start readying the rooms for their employer. Without a second thought, the Killer sets up his rifle and doesn't forget to slip on his black gloves. The Killer then spots his target, who happens to be a grandfatherly figure. Even so, this older gentleman possesses immense wealth and global business interests. Hence, his visit here has an important purpose: to release a dense fluid with the help of a woman of the night. With his heartbeat stabilized and the Killer primed to fire, his index finger abruptly trembles. As a result, his shot misses and strikes the woman instead.
Fuck.
Realizing what's happened, the old man's security guards arrive in no time. The Killer quickly packs up and departs the building. Fleeing on a motorcycle, he discards certain pieces of evidence into a gutter and a garbage truck. He then makes his way to the airport, intending to fly back to his hideout, but the purchase of his ticket must be delayed due to extensive security presence. After finally securing a seat under a false identity, the Killer contacts Hodges to report that his shot went wide. Hearing this, Hodges is both shocked and angry, as this is the first time the Killer has ever failed. Hodges then orders the Killer to correct the situation. Otherwise, the Killer will inevitably face his own consequences. During the flight, the Killer grows uneasy about a mysterious man who keeps casting glances in his direction. Arriving at his transit airport, he encounters the same mysterious figure again, following him and waiting in the lounge. To confirm whether the man is spying on him, the Killer decides to stay overnight in the airport. He also remains on high alert in his hotel room there, in case the stranger tries to barge in unexpectedly. The next day, the Killer boards his second flight, and fortunately, the mysterious man does not reappear. In short order, the Killer arrives at the airport in the Dominican Republic. It is in this country that he has been in hiding. He drives his beloved car to his remote home, far from city life. Upon reaching the gate to the house, the Killer notices footprints and scattered cigarette butts. Sensing something is wrong, he rushes through the shrubs toward the house. There he finds the living room in shambles and red stains everywhere. However, the Killer does not see any sign of his wife. With mounting worry, the Killer heads straight to the hospital, where he finally finds her, badly injured and receiving treatment. In the hospital, the Killer meets his brother-in-law, who explains that 2 people, a man and a woman, arrived at the house in a green taxi. They then assaulted his wife. Looking furious, the Killer tells his brother-in-law that nothing like this will ever happen again. Later, when his wife wakes up, she tells the Killer that she never revealed anything about him, even under physical threats. Unwilling to let her suffer for his mistake, the Killer returns to the house to retrieve his tools. At daybreak, the Killer starts hunting down those who harmed her, beginning with the taxi driver. Since there are many green taxis in the area, The killer visits the rental company, where he forces the owner to show him the driver logs. From that data, the killer tracks down a specific driver named Leo, who had taken the perpetrators to their destination. The next morning, the killer finds Leo as he starts his shift. Long story short, the killer pretends to be a passenger in need of a ride. After weaving through several alleys, the killer points a firearm at Leo and demands answers about the 2 tourists he ferried. Leo describes in detail picking them up and dropping them off at a remote house in the forest. He also offers their descriptions. One is a big man, the brute, and the other is a skinny woman, the expert. Though Leo himself is not guilty in any direct sense, the killer still ends him in line with his principle of never showing empathy on the job. The killer then flies to New Orleans to confront his boss. Once in New Orleans, he rents a van for disguise purposes, as gaining entry to Hodges's office is not as simple as walking into a convenience store. Before that, the killer visits one of his storage units in a warehouse. Inside, he possesses a trove of fake IDs and all kinds of license plates. After gathering what he needs, the killer does a bit of tool shopping, intent on posing as a maintenance worker to get inside Hodges's building. Long story short, once everything is prepared, the killer sneaks into Hodges's office by slipping in behind a delivery worker. After the courier leaves, he swiftly takes Hodges's secretary, named Dolores, hostage, and demands she lead him to Hodges. Once face to face, the killer restrains both of Hodges's hands to a chair, while Dolores is secured in the restroom. The killer then starts to question Hodges about the individuals who attacked his wife, but Hodges refuses to cooperate and warns the killer that his wife's predicament was the assassin's own doing. Had he handled things differently, it would never have escalated to this point. However, the killer does not show interest in debate. He smashes their mission records and uses 3 nails to injure Hodges's chest. The killer offers Hodges a final chance to reveal the identities of those 2 people he sent, or else. Before he can speak, however, Hodges passes away. Next, the killer turns to Dolores. Dolores says she will hand over the attackers' identities, but she asks the killer to make her own passing look natural, so her children can claim insurance benefits. After he agrees, the killer transports Hodges's body to Dolores's home. There, Dolores provides the killer with the 2 names of those who attacked his wife. She also hands over the identity of the client who initially requested the old man's elimination in Paris. Armed with this information, the killer ends Dolores by twisting her neck atop the staircase, so it appears she died from a simple fall. The killer then heads back to his storage unit to dismember Hodges, after which he crosses the water by ferry and scatters some of Hodges's remains at sea. The rest he buries in a place where no one will discover them. The following day, the killer travels to Florida in search of the large framed attacker, the Brute. The killer locates the Brute's home, and he keeps a pet there. Fearing that the animal might cause trouble, the killer first buys some Sominex along with ground meat, intending to ensure the dog remains sedated and does not interfere with his plan. After everything is set, the killer observes that the Brute is going out to a club with his friends. He tails him continuously, until finally the Brute returns home alone. With the Brute now by himself, the killer sets his plan into motion by feeding the pit bull a portion of the tainted ground meat. Then he slips in through the back door, but while the killer is momentarily distracted, the Brute suddenly charges at him, triggering a tense fight between the 2. Despite his opponent's formidable build, the killer ultimately subdues him with 3 shots from his firearm.
You know, most people...
The noise, however, rouses the dog. The killer sprints away with all his might, barely managing to escape the animal's pursuit. The next morning, the killer flies to New York to target the other assailant, the expert. After waiting several hours, the killer finally sees that the expert is about to leave. He follows her and eventually ends up at a restaurant. There, the killer openly approaches her. Realizing that she will not survive, she immediately orders her favorite meal. Once her food arrives, she casually invites the killer to enjoy it with her. The killer declines, suspecting that she might have tampered with the food. At this point, the expert shares a story about how she is much like the killer himself. She narrates a tale about a deer hunter who accidentally crosses paths with a bear. The hunter tries to harm the bear, but the bear remains unharmed and warns him not to attempt it again, or there will be consequences. In the following days, the hunter repeatedly tries using bigger and bigger tools, and so on. Without hesitation, the killer invites the expert to a park. And there in that park, the killer carries out the plan against the expert. The next day, the killer sets out once again, this time to meet the client who hired him to eliminate the old man at the beginning of the film. The killer suspects that this client is the one who asked Hodges to retaliate against him. The killer tracks the client to an apartment building, but upon arrival, he realizes he needs a special passkey to enter. As a true master, the killer doesn't give up so easily. He orders a counterfeit passkey panel from an online store so he can duplicate the card. While waiting for the package, the killer pretends to register for a gym membership inside that apartment complex. Then he visits a criminal underworld contact in a back alley to purchase a sidearm. The following morning, the killer's package arrives, and he initiates his plan. First, he steals a staffer's locker key, then copies the staff ID into the passkey system for the apartment entrance. Once everything is in place, the killer gains entry to the apartment with very little trouble and finally comes face to face with the client, who turns out to be a wealthy trader. At first, the client is confused, not recognizing the killer, but once the killer displays his professional business card, the client quickly realizes that the armed man before him is indeed the hired assassin. Visibly shaken, the client explains that after the killer's initial failure, he received a call from Hodges, informing him the job had fallen apart and that it would take an additional fee to wipe the slate clean. Having never hired such services before and being clueless about that realm, the client simply followed Hodges' instructions. The killer then nudges the conversation toward what happened to his wife, but the client appears genuinely bewildered, as though he truly has no knowledge of the attack on her. Noting the client's sincere expression, the killer spares him. In the end, the killer concludes that Hodges alone orchestrated the two attackers who hurt his wife. Determined to move on, the killer decides to just head back home. In short, he returns there and opts for a long vacation with his wife, who is slowly recovering. And that's where the film concludes. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe, because by subscribing you have supported me to make better videos. See you in the next video.